I'll be back with that story after this message.
Hey guys, Mac here with WhoopSaaS. This is kind of a part 2 of the last video where I took you through a rough sort of foundation framework build of any SaaS organization, whether it's structuring a foundation for an emergent SaaS organization or perhaps looking for areas you might be able to refine a framework of an existing mid-late stage SaaS organization. You might through the MQL phase up here, marketing qualified lead, how we go through business development teams to qualify through lead maturation criteria. I'll put LMC, and then successfully passing through the filter, the predefined lead maturation criteria. It will then go down into the sales qualified opportunity phase in the pipeline here. And we have the 5-stage F filter, E excavate, D differentiate, C confirm value, B bond, A activate. Again, keeping it simple, keeping it easy to understand and adopt, and well-defined stage gates and exit criteria for each. Okay, what I didn't speak about so much in the last episode is that I think is equally important, again, whether you're building that foundation or you are looking to refine existing processes, is the organizational structure. So over here, I've drawn a schematic of sorts that aligns. I did my best to kind of align it this way to the process that we outlined. So what I want to take you through is an example of what I've called a pod. It's also known as a sub-business unit. It follows a lot of the same organizational structure principles of the famous Jeff Bezos 2 pizza rule. If your team, a team should never get so big to where you can't adequately feed it with 2 pizzas. I always joke, it depends on who's on that team. Anyway, but that's the idea. Teams of 7 to 10 are usually a healthy number, and then once it graduates beyond that, it becomes less efficient. So trying to scale your organization into teams or pods, sub-business units of 7 to 10 is always a good rule of thumb. So let's talk about when we first start out though, and we're trying to develop a team of 7 to 10. I think it's good to begin early to start thinking in terms of how you might organize the sales and marketing organization at first. You might just start with a digital marketing manager or demand generation person here, one person. You might just have one person kind of functioning both as an inbound market developer as well as an outbound market developer, often named SDR or BDR. SDRs are the sales development reps filtering through all the inbound stuff, whereas BDRs are typically the outbound folks making the outbound touches and following certain marketing campaigns and cadences on an outbound function. And then you might just have one account executive, or maybe this one person operates all, and you're that small, you're that lean. So point being, you can structure this however you want. I believe that there is a minimum of maybe 3 people to a pod to really call it a pod, because you want to make sure you span across someone who is accountable and responsible for this, as well as this, as well as the sales stuff, as well as then and the activate and the customer advocacy program, upsell, cross-sell, renewal, that there's a person in a role that is accountable for those functions, but also for the productivity there. Okay, so what I've drawn out here in this schematic is typically, again, you want to have a marketing person that's responsible and accountable for what are we going to be doing here in the top of the funnel from a messaging and positioning standpoint? What are some of the campaigns and nurture tracks and things of that nature that we want to put together as far as strategic content that we publish to position ourselves as thought leader in the space, or have certain things published on your website or subdomains to drive traffic, to build credibility with your target audience, those sorts of things. Bottom of the funnel, again, we talked about, I usually just use the quote, trial or demo, the QTD method. Those are again the more common call to actions, but someone needs to own that up here. And then you might just have a demand generation marketing person there in that role. In this schematic, we drew an SDR and an MD. The SDR, again, would handle all the inbound. So what's primarily generated from these marketing source leads here would filter through to the SDR for lead maturation criteria to be established. And then the market developer would work with marketing and sales kind of in more of a quasi-marketing, quasi-sales function, where they are now working on campaigns where there is an outbound call warranted as a step in a particular cadence for a campaign like that. That's going to have to be for another episode when we talk through some of the how they function, some of the best practices around developing those campaigns and those cadences. And then you want at least one account executive. In this case, I have 2 account executives. You might divide an account executive. This one might be focused on mid-market enterprise, perhaps, where this one is more SMB, lower mid-market. You could also divide them up by geography, or you could have them just kind of doubling down in the same focus area, but doubling down, which also works well. And lastly, you have your customer success manager and your account manager. What's the difference between the two? The customer success manager is typically going to be that initial point of contact, the more technical person that takes care of the initial onboarding, launching the customer, ensuring proper adoption in the initial months of that first term, as an example. And then the account manager is more of the person that's accountable and responsible for managing this growing book of business in the pod. That brings us to talking about a book of business. So this is where the pod really starts to take off and work well for synergy and just overall efficiency of managing and being accountable to this process through this organizational structure. I wrote book of business here. So let's say they're starting book of business at the beginning of a fiscal period, or let's use the year as an example, is they have a book of business of $150,000 in annual recurring revenue. What you can do here now is create variable income structures or commission structures and bonus structures that are tied directly to the growth of this book of business. So everyone here wins so long as this initial book of business grows at a rate of 25% quarter over quarter. And you might do month over month, but definitely quarter over quarter is a good one to start with. So if they're growing that book of business 25% quarter over quarter, whatever the percentage of attainment of that is will tie back to the variable income payouts to everyone in the pod. And it's great. It works best if everyone has the same amount of skin in the game and is affected. Because here's the thing, that book of business might drop if with churn, with customer turnover, if they start with 150 in annual recurring revenue and 2 customers that make up 20K of annual recurring revenue churn during that time, well, now they're dropped down to 130K and they have to make up that much more ground. And everyone's aligned in the same way, and it works great if that's the case. So definitely a big fan of taking this further than just establishing the roles and functional activities, aligning it to the process, but also structuring your compensation strategy in a way that also reinforces that alignment, and that works really well. Only other thing I'm leaving out here is it's great to assign a director role or a manager or team lead type role to oversee a particular pod, and you might just call that a pod director. And this is one person that may not have the authority over the roles that are within a particular pod, but they certainly must have at least accountability for the performance of this pod and be the spokesperson, if you will, in maybe your leadership team meetings and other kind of up the totem pole type reporting and communications from this particular pod. So that's the only other role, and you can see with that in this full role we have 6, 7, 8 people. It follows that Jeff Bezos 2 pizza rule. It creates a very efficient organizational structure. It aligns them very well to be held accountable, responsible, and have just the right authority over managing this process and creating the efficiencies that we spoke about in the last episode. So I hope that helps. And as always, I'm down for having a conversation. If you are, feel free to reach out to me. I'm Michael McDonald with WhoopSaaS. Talk to you guys soon.